First Contact's First Dinner. The gleaming spires of the New York Culinary Institute pierced the morning sky as Chef Maria Santos wiped her brow, surveying her kitchen with a mixture of pride and apprehension. In just 6 hours, she would be cooking for the first alien delegation to ever visit Earth, and the weight of representing humanity's culinary arts rested squarely on her shoulders. They're saying the Zylaxians process nutrients through some kind of molecular absorption, her sous chef, David, mentioned as he meticulously arranged herbs. Maybe we should have stuck with molecular gastronomy instead of traditional cooking. Maria shook her head, her dark curls bouncing with determination. No, if we're going to show them who we are, we show them honestly. We cook with fire, with passion, with our hands in the dough and our hearts in the food. That's what makes us human. The Zylaxian ship had landed 3 days ago, its crystalline structure casting rainbow refractions across Central Park. Their initial diplomatic meetings had gone well enough, but tonight's dinner would be the first true cultural exchange. The aliens had agreed to participate in a traditional Earth meal, though their research team had expressed concerns about what they called humanity's primitive thermal protein modification techniques. As Maria began preparing her signature dish, a contemporary take on her grandmother's cochinita pebble, the kitchen's holoscreen flickered to life with breaking news. The Zylaxian ambassador, Superior Envoy Ksolth, was making this statement about Earth's food practices. We find it deeply concerning. The translator rendered the ambassador's harmonic tones into English, that humans still rely on the application of heat to organic matter for sustenance. Such practices went extinct in most civilized systems millennia ago. The ambassador's iridescent scales shifted through shades of violet and blue, indicating what the cultural briefing had described as diplomatic distress. Maria's knife paused mid-chop. David cursed under his breath. They're already judging us, and they haven't even tried the food yet. Then we'll just have to change their minds, Maria replied, returning to her prep work with renewed vigor. She had chosen this menu carefully, dishes that showcased not just flavor and technique, but the story of human civilization told through food. As the afternoon progressed, the kitchen transformed into a symphony of sizzling pans, bubbling pots, and the rhythmic chopping of knives. Maria moved between stations, tasting, adjusting, perfecting. The aroma of toasted spices and slow-roasted meats filled the air, a fragrance that told the story of thousands of years of human culinary evolution. At precisely 1800 hours, the first members of the Zylaxian delegation arrived. Their environmental suits, necessary for Earth's atmosphere, gave them an otherworldly glow as they entered the dining room. Ambassador Ksolth led the group, followed by their chief scientist, Dr. Zira, and several other officials whose titles Maria couldn't pronounce. The first challenge came immediately. The Zylaxians' environmental suits were equipped with molecular analyzers that began rapidly cataloging the chemical compositions of everything in sight. Dr. Zira's appendages twitched in what appeared to be alarm. These compounds, the scientist's translator warbled, they'd been subjected to temperatures exceeding 150 degrees Celsius. The molecular structures are completely altered. Maria stepped forward, her chef's whites pristine, her voice steady. Distinguished guests, on Earth, cooking is more than just nutrition. It's an art form that tells the story of our species. Every dish before you represents thousands of years of human innovation, culture, and love. Ambassador Ksolth's scales shifted to a skeptical green. Love, through the application of heat to organic matter. Yes, Maria smiled, gesturing to the first course being plated. This dish, for example, is inspired by my grandmother's recipe, passed down through generations. We call it cochinita pebble, pork marinated in achiote and sour orange, wrapped in banana leaves, and slowly roasted until it's tender enough to melt on your tongue. The Zylaxian's translator struggled with several of these concepts, but Maria pressed on. She described how humans had discovered fire, learned to cook, and in doing so, had changed the course of their evolution. How cooking had brought people together, formed communities, created civilizations. The ambassador's scales flickered between colors of curiosity and concern. Your species places great cultural significance on this practice. More than you know, Maria replied. Every human culture has its own unique ways of preparing food, but we all share one thing in common. We use cooking to show love, to build connections, to celebrate life itself. Dr. Zira's appendages waved in what might have been excitement. Fascinating. A cultural ritual disguised as a nutritional practice. Perhaps we should analyze this phenomenon more closely. The first courses were served, and Maria held her breath as the Galaxians used their suit's molecular absorption functions to sample the food. At first, there was silence. Then, Ambassador Keksolth's scales began to pulse with a color Maria hadn't seen before, a deep, rich gold. "This is unexpected," the ambassador's translator crackled. "The molecular complexity is extraordinary. Each compound interacts with the others in ways our nutritional science hasn't considered. And you say this variation in temperature and texture is intentional?" Maria nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. Every temperature, every technique, every combination of ingredients is chosen carefully to create a specific experience. Would you like to learn more? The ambassador's scales rippled with that golden hue again. Perhaps we have been hasty in our judgment of human culinary practices. Dr. Zira, make note. We must conduct a more thorough investigation of this cooking phenomenon. As the evening progressed, the Galaxians became increasingly engaged, asking detailed questions about each dish, the cooking methods, the cultural significance. By dessert, a deconstructed tres leches cake that had Dr. Zira's appendages practically dancing. The atmosphere had transformed from diplomatic tension to genuine cultural exchange. Chef Santos, Ambassador Keksolth addressed Maria as the meal concluded, scales now pulsing with warm, appreciative colors. "You have given us much to consider. Perhaps the application of heat to organic matter is not as primitive as we initially assumed. Would you be willing to share more of your species' culinary knowledge with us?" Maria smiled, thinking of all the dishes she could still show them, all the stories she could tell through food. "Ambassador, this is just the beginning. Wait until you try what we can do with chocolate." The taste that shocked the stars. News of the successful diplomatic dinner spread through the galaxy faster than light-speed communications. Within days, the Intergalactic Council was abuzz with discussions about human cuisine. Some species were horrified, others intrigued, but all were intensely curious about these humans who had somehow turned basic sustenance into an art form. Chef Maria Santos found herself thrust into an unexpected spotlight. The Galaxian delegation had not only published a comprehensive report on human cooking methods, but had also requested she lead a series of culinary demonstrations for various alien species. The New York Culinary Institute's demonstration kitchen had been hastily retrofitted with environmental controls to accommodate a dozen different atmospheric requirements. "I still can't believe we're doing this," David muttered as he helped Maria set up for their first intergalactic cooking class. "Last week we were worried about impressing food critics. Now we're teaching aliens how to saute." Maria laughed, adjusting the thermal imaging displays they'd installed so their guests could better understand the cooking process. "The universe works in mysterious ways. Now, did you remember to get the special ingredients I asked for?" Before David could answer, the air shimmed with the arrival of their first students. The Galaxians had returned, along with representatives from 3 other species, the crystalline Arxos, who normally absorbed energy directly from their sun, the gaseous Nebulans, who fed on cosmic radiation, and the silicon-based Petroxians, who had never considered organic matter as a potential food source. Ambassador Keksolth's scales glowed with anticipation. "Chef Santos, we have brought specialists in molecular gastronomy from across the galaxy. They are most eager to understand your thermal transformation techniques." Dr. Zira hovered nearby, multiple appendages clutching various scanning devices. "We have theorized that the human practice of cooking might have applications beyond mere sustenance. The chemical reactions involved could revolutionize our understanding of matter itself. Maria nodded, hiding her amusement at their scientific approach to what she considered an act of love. Today, we're going to explore one of humanity's most beloved cooking techniques, caramelization. She began with simple sugar, letting it melt slowly in a heavy-bottomed pan. The aliens crowded around, their various sensory organs fixed on the transformation taking place before them. The Arxos' crystalline structure resonated with harmonic frequencies as they observed the sugar's molecular structure changing. The nebulons swirled in patterns of increasing complexity, their gaseous forms becoming more concentrated as they analyzed the process. "Observe," Maria explained, tilting the pan to show the sugar's progression from white crystals to golden liquid to deep amber. "We're not just changing its state, we're creating new flavors, new textures, new possibilities." The Petroxian's silicon-based sensors whirred with excitement. The complexity of the chemical reactions is extraordinary, and humans discovered this through experimentation, through thousands of years of curiosity, necessity, and creativity. Maria confirmed, adding a splash of cream to the caramel. The mixture bubbled and steamed, releasing an aroma that had even the non-organic beings leaning closer. Dr. Zira's appendages waved frantically as they recorded data. "The molecular restructuring is far more sophisticated than our initial analysis suggested. And you achieve this without quantum manipulation or molecular disassemblers. Just heat, timing, and understanding." Maria smiled, pouring the finished caramel sauce into a bowl. "Would you like to try it?" The aliens looked at each other uncertainly. Ambassador Keksolth's scales shifted through several colors before settling on a determined blue. "In the interest of scientific diplomacy, we shall." Using their various methods of molecular absorption and analysis, each species sampled the caramel. The reaction was immediate and unprecedented. The Arxos began to glow with colors previously unknown in their spectrum. The nebulons condensed into shapes that their linguists later explained were expressions of extreme pleasure. The Petroxians actually began to vibrate at frequencies that resonated with the building's foundation. Ambassador Keksolth's scales had turned that deep gold color again, but this time with swirls of iridescent patterns that Maria hadn't seen before. "This is beyond our understanding. The complexity, the balance, the way the molecules dance together. It is not just sustenance. It is, as you said, art." "And that's just caramel," Maria grinned, reaching for her spice rack. "Wait until you see what happens when we start combining flavors." For the next several hours, Maria demonstrated various cooking techniques, each one generating more excitement than the last. The aliens were particularly fascinated by the Maillard reaction, the process responsible for the complex flavors in browned foods. Dr. Zira nearly overloaded their scanning equipment trying to document every chemical change. But it was when Maria began explaining the cultural significance of cooking that the true breakthrough occurred. She told them about family recipes passed down through generations, about different cultures coming together over shared meals, about the way food could comfort, celebrate, and heal. "You mean to say," a Nebulon researcher pulsed thoughtfully, "that these chemical reactions serve a social function beyond nutrition?" "Exactly," Maria said, stirring a pot of slowly simmering sauce. "When humans cook for each other, we're not just providing sustenance. We're sharing our history, our culture, our love." The aliens fell into a deep discussion, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, pulses, and color changes. Finally, Ambassador Keksolth turned to Maria, their scales showing a new pattern she hadn't seen before. "Chef Santos, we believe human cooking techniques could revolutionize intergalactic relations. Would you consider expanding your teaching program, perhaps to other worlds?" A recipe for peace. The invitation to teach on other worlds launched humanity's first interstellar culinary exchange program. 3 months later, Maria found herself aboard the Zalaxian flagship, converted into a state-of-the-art teaching facility, traveling between star systems like some sort of cosmic cooking instructor. Her classroom was unlike anything she could have imagined. The chamber could adjust its environmental conditions instantly to accommodate any species, and holographic displays showed molecular transformations in real time as she cooked. Students from dozens of worlds attended her classes, each bringing their own unique perspective on food and sustenance. Today's lesson was particularly challenging. Teaching a class of energy beings from the Helios cluster how to appreciate the textural differences in a perfect risotto. The key, Maria explained, stirring the rice as it absorbed the simmering broth, is patience. You can't rush this process. Each grain needs time to release its starches, to create that creamy texture while maintaining its individual structure. The Heliosians, who appeared as swirling vortexes of plasma, pulsed with curiosity. Their translator rendered their thoughts. But why not simply convert the matter instantly to its desired state? Why engage in this prolonged energy expenditure? Maria smiled, having heard variations of this question from every species she taught. Because the process itself is part of the experience. Cooking isn't just about the destination. It's about the journey. Dr. Zira, who had become her permanent research partner, waved their appendages in agreement. Our studies have shown that the temporal aspect of human cooking methods creates unique chemical compositions impossible to achieve through instant transformation. The laboratory section of the classroom was filled with aliens attempting their first risotto. Some succeeded brilliantly. The silicon-based Petroctians, with their natural affinity for heat control, produced perfectly creamy results. Others struggled. The gaseous nebulons kept accidentally vaporizing their rice. But it wasn't just cooking techniques that were being exchanged. As species learned to cook human foods, they began sharing their own culinary traditions. The Arxos taught Maria about energy absorption patterns that could create entirely new flavors. The Nebulons shared their understanding of molecular harmonics that could enhance taste perception. During one memorable class, a Petroctian student had a breakthrough. Chef Santos, I believe I understand now. The stirring motion. It's not just about heat distribution. It's meditation, a form of connecting with the food. Maria beamed. Exactly. Cooking engages all our senses, our full attention. It's a form of mindfulness that humans have practiced for thousands of years. The impact of these classes reached far beyond the culinary arts. Species that had never communicated directly began sharing meals together. Traditional enemies found common ground in their appreciation of a well-cooked dish. The simple act of preparing and sharing food was breaking down barriers that centuries of traditional diplomacy had failed to breach. Ambassador Ksolth, whose scales now regularly displayed that warm golden hue, shared their observations during one of their regular meetings. We've noticed an interesting phenomenon. Chef Santos, worlds that participate in your program show a 47% increase in successful diplomatic negotiations. Food has always brought people together on Earth, Maria replied, chopping vegetables for her next demonstration. I guess some things are universal. The program's success led to an unprecedented proposal from the Intergalactic Council. They'd wanted to establish a permanent culinary institute of the galaxy, with branches on every member world. Each location would teach not only human cooking techniques, but the culinary arts of all species. The announcement caused quite a stir. Conservative factions from various worlds protested, arguing that traditional methods of sustenance should be preserved. But they were increasingly in the minority. The evidence was clear. Worlds that embraced culinary diversity were experiencing remarkable improvements in interspecies relations. One evening, as Maria was preparing for the next day's classes, she received an urgent message. A conflict had erupted between the Arxos and Nebulons over mining rights in a disputed star system. Both sides were threatening war. Ambassador Ksolth's scales shifted anxiously as they explained the situation. The Council wonders, would you consider hosting a diplomatic dinner? Maria paused, considering the challenge. The Arxos couldn't eat Nebulon food without crystallizing, and the Nebulons would dissipate if exposed to Arxos energy patterns. Finding a middle ground seemed impossible. Then she remembered something from her grandmother's kitchen. When enemies sit at the same table, she'd always said, they have to see each other as people. "I'll do it," Maria declared. "But I'm going to need some special equipment and access to both Arxos crystal harmonics and Nebulon wave patterns." Dr. Zira's appendages twitched with curiosity. "What are you planning?" Maria grinned, already sketching out her ideas. "We're going to create the first truly universal fusion cuisine. A meal that everyone can eat together, regardless of their biological makeup." The ambassador's scales flickered with hope. "Can such a thing be done?" "There's only one way to find out," Maria replied, rolling up her sleeves. "Get me that equipment, and tell both delegations to arrive hungry." The intergalactic cook-off. The next 48 hours were a blur of experimentation, calculation, and more than a few small explosions. Maria's kitchen laboratory aboard the Zalaxian flagship had been transformed into something that looked more like a quantum physics experiment than a cooking space. Energy converters hummed alongside traditional stovetops, and holographic displays showed molecular structures floating beside recipe cards. David, who had joined her as Earth's second certified interstellar chef, stared at the complex array of equipment. "You really think we can create something both a crystalline being and a gaseous entity can eat, without either species being destroyed in the process?" "We have to," Maria replied, adjusting the harmonic frequency of an Arxos crystal resonator. "Otherwise, we might be looking at the galaxy's first food-related war." Dr. Zira had assembled a team of the finest xenobiologists and molecular gastronomists from across known space. They worked tirelessly, combining their knowledge of different species' digestive processes with Maria's understanding of flavor and texture. The breakthrough came at hour 37, during what Maria later called her grandmother moment. "Wait," she said, interrupting a heated debate between a Petroxian physicist and a Nebulon chemist. "We're thinking about this all wrong. We're trying to create something both species can eat, but what if instead we create an experience both can share?" She grabbed a piece of chalk, she still preferred it to holographic markers, and began sketching on a board. "The Arxos experience food through crystalline resonance patterns, right? And the Nebulons through wave function absorption. What if we could create a dish that exists simultaneously in both states?" Dr. Zira's appendages wiggled with excitement. "A quantum superposition of flavors. Theoretically possible, but the energy requirements would be massive," Maria finished, "unless we use cooking to catalyze the reaction." She pointed to her sketch. "Traditional cooking is all about transforming states of matter. We just need to take it to the next level." The team worked through the night, combining cutting-edge science with ancient cooking techniques. They used modified pressure cookers to create quantum-stable flavor matrices and adapted sous-vide methods to maintain molecular coherence. Maria's understanding of temperature control and timing proved crucial in stabilizing the exotic matter states they were creating. When the delegations arrived, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Though, as David pointed out, given the species involved, a knife would have been useless anyway. The Arxos representatives gleamed with barely contained anger, their crystalline forms refracting light in sharp, aggressive patterns. The Nebulon delegates swirled in tight, agitated formations, their gaseous forms crackling with potential energy. Ambassador Cuxulth's scales had taken on a nervous gray hue. "Chef Santos, are you certain about this?" Maria nodded, though her heart was racing. "Trust in the food," she said, echoing her grandmother's words once again. The dining room had been specially modified for the occasion. Each place setting featured both traditional tableware and advanced containment fields. The centerpiece was a device that looked like a cross between a lazy Susan and a particle accelerator. "Distinguished delegates," Maria began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "Today I'm honored to present a new kind of dish, one that celebrates both your unique natures and your potential for harmony." She activated the central device, and the room filled with a soft, pulsing glow. Above each plate, what appeared to be a small galaxy materialized. swirling clouds of gaseous flavors orbiting crystalline cores of concentrated taste. This dish exists in multiple states simultaneously, Maria explained. For our Arxos guests, the crystalline structures will resonate with your natural frequencies, creating flavor harmonics that complement your own. For our Nebulon delegates, the gaseous elements will merge with your wave functions, producing taste experiences unique to your form. The delegates regarded the dishes with mixed suspicion and curiosity. An Arxos elder's voice rang out like chiming crystal, and we are expected to consume this together. That's the beauty of it, Maria smiled. The dish is designed so that when both species eat simultaneously, the flavors enhance each other. What one of you experiences will literally be improved by the other's participation. There was a moment of hesitation. Then, slowly, an elderly Nebulon delegate drifted forward. I remember, their translator crackled, reading reports about how humans used to fight wars over spices, yet now they trade recipes instead of weapons. Perhaps we could learn from their example. The Arxos elder's crystalline surface flickered thoughtfully. Our conflicts have always been about resources, but this is a resource that grows when shared. At an unspoken signal, both delegations began to eat, the room filled with gasps and chimes of surprise as the quantum-entangled flavors took effect. Where the Arxos experienced brilliant resonances of taste, their enjoyment actually amplified the wave patterns the Nebulons were absorbing, and vice versa. Extraordinary, the Arxos elder chimed. I can taste the harmony, the flavor patterns. A Nebulon delegate pulsed excitedly. They mirror the crystalline structures we've been fighting over. As the meal progressed, the conversation gradually shifted from careful diplomacy to genuine curiosity. The Arxos and Nebulons began sharing their own cultural traditions around energy consumption. They discovered that both species had similar rituals for celebrating stellar phenomena, though they experienced them differently. By dessert, a particularly tricky creation that Maria called quantum punch, the delegates were actually laughing together, their natural forms relaxed and harmonious. Ambassador Cuxulf's scales had shifted to that deep, satisfied gold. Chef Santos, I believe you've done it again. Though I must admit, I never expected world peace to taste quite like this. Maria watched as the formerly hostile delegates continued to share stories and experiences. Food has always been about more than just eating, she said softly. It's about finding common ground, even when that ground exists in multiple quantum states at once. Fusion of two worlds. 1 year after the historic quantum dinner that prevented an interstellar war, Maria stood in the gleaming kitchen of Convergence, the first restaurant in the galaxy designed to serve every known species. Located in a specially constructed space station orbiting Earth, its grand opening was being broadcast across thousands of worlds. The kitchen was a testament to how far things had come. Traditional Earth cookware sat alongside Arxos crystal resonators and Nebulon wave modulators. Petroxian heat manipulators hummed next to conventional ovens, while Zalaxian molecular synthesizers shared counter space with well-seasoned cast iron pans. Never thought I'd see a wok next to a quantum harmonizer, David mused, putting the finishing touches on a dish that existed in 5 different states of matter simultaneously. Maria smiled, remembering her grandmother's tiny kitchen back on Earth. Abuela always said the best kitchens tell stories. I wonder what she'd make of this one. The restaurant's design was revolutionary. The main dining room could shift its environmental conditions instantly to accommodate any species, with special sections for those requiring extreme temperatures or exotic atmospheres. But the real innovation was in the food itself. Every dish on the menu was a collaboration between human cooking techniques and alien food science. Classic Earth recipes had been reimagined using advanced technology, while traditional alien energy consumption patterns had been adapted into forms that captured the essence of human cuisine. Dr. Zira, now the head of the Intergalactic Culinary Research Institute, was busy calibrating the quantum flavor matrices. The latest calculations suggest we can achieve a 98.7% harmony rating across all known species taste receptors. That's impressive. Maria nodded. But remember what I taught you. Numbers aren't everything. How does it feel? The Zylaxian scientist's appendages wiggled in what Maria had come to recognize as embarrassed agreement. After months of working together, even the most technical-minded aliens had begun to understand that cooking was as much art as science. Ambassador Keksolf swept into the kitchen, their scales glowing with that now familiar golden hue. The first guests are arriving. Are we ready? Maria looked around at her staff. A mix of humans and aliens, all working together in perfectly choreographed chaos. A Petrocchian sous chef was teaching the human assistant the finer points of silicon-based flavor extraction. A Nebulon pastry specialist was collaborating with an Arxos crystallographer to create desserts that could be both eaten and experienced as pure energy. "We're ready," she confirmed, reaching for her apron, still the same one she'd worn in her grandmother's kitchen, now adorned with an array of universal translator patches and environmental seals. The opening night of Convergence was more than just a dinner service. It was a celebration of how far both humanity and the galactic community had come. The dining room was filled with species that, just a year ago, would never have considered sharing a meal together. Maria moved from table to table, watching as her creations brought joy to beings of all forms. A group of energy creatures savored the quantum resonance of her deconstructed palate. A silicon-based family shared their first experience of ice cream, reimagined as a crystalline matrix that maintained its cold sensation even at their natural high temperatures. But it was the reactions of her human guests that touched her most deeply, watching their faces light up as they experienced familiar flavors in entirely new ways, seeing them share meals with beings they once thought too alien to understand. It was everything cooking had ever meant to her. During a brief quiet moment, Ambassador Keksolf found her in the kitchen. "You know," they said, their scales shimmering with amusement, "when I first arrived on Earth, I thought human cooking was primitive and barbaric." Maria laughed, stirring a pot of quantum-stabilized bone broth. "And now? Now I understand that it was we who were primitive, thinking that sustenance was merely about biological necessity. Your species took something as basic as eating and turned it into an art form, a way to connect, to communicate, to create peace. Food has always been about bringing people together," Maria said, tasting the broth and adding a pinch of salt. Some things, even in the age of interstellar travel, were still best done the old-fashioned way. We just needed to expand our definition of people a bit. As the evening wound down, Maria received word that Convergence was already booked solid for the next 3 Earth years. Similar restaurants were being planned for every major world in the galaxy. The Intergalactic Culinary Institute had a waiting list thousands of names long. But more importantly, reports were coming in from across the galaxy of species that had historically been in conflict, finding new ways to connect through shared meals. The quantum dinner that had prevented war between the Arxos and Nebulons had become a template for a new kind of diplomacy, one based on breaking bread together, even when that bread existed in a superposition of quantum states. Later that night, after the last guest had left and the kitchen was finally quiet, Maria stood at her favorite spot by the window, Earth glowing blue and beautiful below. She pulled out her grandmother's old recipe book, now translated into 57 alien languages, and ran her fingers over its worn cover. "You were right, Abuela," she whispered. "The secret ingredient really is love, even if sometimes that love has to be expressed through quantum mechanics." Behind her, the kitchen hummed with the sound of multiple universes worth of cooking equipment cooling down for the night. Somewhere in the distance, a Nebulon sous chef was humming an Earth tune they'd learned from the human staff. Through the window, she could see ships arriving from across the galaxy, bringing more people, more beings, eager to share in this new age of culinary diplomacy. Maria smiled and began planning tomorrow's menu. After all, the galaxy was a big place, And there were still so many new recipes to discover, so many new ways to bring people together, one meal at a time.